On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this episode we go to Scarborough and see what happens when a walrus turns up a few days before the end of the year. And we are also going to Portugal, where we're going to visit my old friend Steve Andrews, you know, the guy with the green beard. And also there's a little piece of footage that Graham took when we were filming with Peter Vittier late last year, and I think that's probably enough for this episode.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. As regular visitors to this show will know, every Wednesday afternoon, or evening really, at 6:30, and every Saturday afternoon at 3, we bring you a miscellany of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality, you may ask? Well, possibly you might count this as. Or on the other hand, you might not. We've got a great show for you today, but before we get on with anything cryptozoological, I want to pass you over to my brother. Well, ladies and gentlemen, much as though it pains me to tell you this, but there are more important things in life than cryptozoology and the other disciplines that we talk about on this show. And there are even more important things than elderly gentlemen dressing up in chicken costumes and generally playing the fool. Because although I tell you that looking at things through humour is one of the best ways of analysing the world around us, there are some things which you can't laugh at, and this is one of them. You may or may not know that my little brother Richard, who's 4 years younger than me, is a clergyman who lives and works in Germany, and recently he visited Ukraine, and he was so upset and appalled at the conditions that the people are living there that he saw while he was there that no sooner had he returned to his wife and family in Germany, but he started up an amazing campaign. In Ireland there's a company called Kelly Kettles who make these wood-burning kettles which do not need external power sources in order to be able to cook and to boil water and to provide heat. And Richard has done a deal with these people, and he has managed to get the Kelly Kettle Company to donate at cost these kettles, which are going to be sent to Ukraine. And Richard is raising money now to buy as many of these kettles as possible. And although I never ask you to raise money on these pages for us, it's very kind of you when you do donate something, but I never ask for money. I now am. Please, can you use the link below and send some money to my brother, who is doing his best to alleviate some of the horrific suffering which the Ukrainian people are undergoing this winter. I am going to be running this advert, because I suppose it's an advert. I've never made an advert before, but I'm going to be running this advert every episode until the springtime. And if the war is still going on when we come to the colder months of the year next year, then I will be running it again. Over the Christmas period, I was going through all the videos that are stored on my iPad, and I found this. It's a small piece that was filmed last autumn when Peter Vittier came to visit us, and it's filmed out at Huddersfield Woods, in the place where, back in 2010, various people who were visiting the Centre for Fortean Zoology for the annual Weird Weekend conference found what turned out to be leopard hairs. Enjoy.
I'll start off. When was the last time you went out and did an expedition?
I told you earlier, you want me to do it again for the 30th. The last proper expedition I did was in 2010 when my late wife and I, who wasn't a late wife at the time, were in Texas on my third trip investigating the sightings of hairless blue dogs. And I didn't know at the time it was going to be my last expedition, but life got in the way, and then mother-in-law, very aged mother-in-law, didn't go anywhere, so we had to look after mother. Although it has to be said, I went to film Jefferson Starship, and we took mother with us, and mother got on so well with she met the band and she was absolutely charming, and I did take her to see Adam and the Ants as well, which was quite fun, because you had about 300 people, mostly old punks, mostly wearing leather jackets, in the auditorium at Barnstable Theatre, and they were all singing along with Adam Ant's songs about bondage and leather and sexual perversion and who taught you to torture? Who taught you? And then there's this little old lady with a headscarf on, nodding her head up and down quite happily and saying, "He's got a nice tune, hasn't he, dear?" And it's things like that I will never forget. She was an absolute poppy, but she did sort of curtail us being able to do some of the trips that we would have liked to do. And then, of course, 2018, Queen caught cancer, and the whole world changed for me. And I'm only just beginning to come back into it again.
Do you miss it?
Yeah. I didn't realise how much I missed it until I came back into it. I mean, I never stopped doing the administration stuff. I kept on doing the blogs and the posts and updating the website and all that stuff. All the stuff I had to do. But I'm now getting back into doing field work again, which means I'm in the process of recruiting a lot of strapping young lads like you who push my wheelchair up the hills.
There you go. Thank you very much.
As you know, we at On The Track have been particularly interested in the visits of walruses to Western Europe, and particularly to the British Isles. And there's been another one. After the particularly sad and tragic visit of Freya, named after the Norse goddess of love, to Western Europe and eventually to Oslo, where she was shot because the people in charge of crowd control at Oslo harbour, presumably on the orders of the Norwegian government, euthanized her. And although it wasn't actually said openly, the only way they could have euthanized her would have been with a gun. After that particularly tragic visit, we've got a new walrus. His name is Thor, whoever gets around to naming these walruses does have a particular penchant for naming them after Norse gods. Okay, the first one was called Wally after a children's TV character, but hey, 2 out of 3 is pretty good if you're a deity these days. I first heard about it on, I think, the 11th of December, when Louis, our producer, phoned me up, or rather called me up on Facebook Messenger on my iPad and said, "Hey John, guess what? There's a walrus on a beach in Hampshire." Well, I was excited enough about walruses on the northeastern beaches of Northumberland and on the West Country beaches and the Western Wales beaches. But for one to turn up right in the south of England is absolutely extraordinary. And I'm glad to say that the response to these walrus sightings was all the same walrus, because he started off in Calshot Beach in Hampshire and then went all the way up to Scarborough. He was probably hoping to go to Scarborough Fair with Parsley, sage, Rosemary and Thyme, but it was completely the wrong time of year. So Thor the walrus decided to go to sleep, and thousands of visitors came to see him, but unlike their counterparts in Norway, the vast majority of them were quiet, peaceful and respectful of our visiting pinniped. The BBC reported that there were a few people who misbehaved and that one person had climbed over the barriers onto private property to get a better photographic angle, but on the whole, the British people, unlike their Norwegian counterparts, behaved like ladies and gentlemen, which is what one would hope from British people. By the way, when we're talking about the Norwegian walrus, you may remember that I wrote to King Harald V of Norway and on behalf of the Centre for Fortean Zoology gave him a stern letter of complaint. I haven't heard back from him, which is a great pity, because I know that if I had written to King Charles on the subject of walruses, I would have received an answer. And that is because I know this because I have written to the Queen, to the Duke of Edinburgh, and to King Charles back when he was the Prince of Wales in the past, and I have always received a polite answer from one of his or her equerries or a private secretary. And I think it's a crying shame that King Harold V's people, whoever those people are, have not persuaded him to write back to this fat weirdo in North Devon who's complaining about the behaviour of the Norwegian people. But enough of that. I'll let you know if I hear back from King Harold, but I want to go back to Scarborough, where the local authorities were sensible and humane enough to cancel the town's New Year's Eve firework display in order not to alarm the walrus. This is in complete contrast to the authorities in Oslo, who just went out and shot the poor beast. When the walrus, Thor, decided he had had enough of sleeping on a slipway in Scarborough and decided to swim back out into the open sea and further north to Blythe, where he ended up a day or so later, there was a huge cheer from the crowd who all wished him well. I have never been more proud to be British. And I have a song for you, all about being British and walruses. However, before I sing it, I just want to remind you that the last time I sang it, it being a direct steal from a song called The English Are Best by the late lamented Flanders and Swan, this being a song which could never be performed publicly today. I had a letter of complaint from an old friend of mine, Judy, from Scotland, who is a lovely lady and I love her dearly, and so for her I have changed the lyrics, and I think you may appreciate this. The last time I sang this song, Judith J. wrote, there are 4 countries in the UK, you old goat. So I rewrote the lyrics to placate Judy and to showcase an issue that means lots to me. 'Cause the British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. The Norwegians kill whales and walruses too. That's something that red-blooded Brits would not do. A walrus called Freya swam into Oslo. Thousands flocked to see her, but wouldn't you know, the crowd control measures all went to pot, and the Norwegian government had the walrus shot. Then we had a visit from a walrus called Thor, the 3rd in 2 years to visit our shores. It swam into Scarborough, we shouted hooray, and cancelled their New Year's Eve firework display. 'Cause the British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. The British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. And before we leave the subject of walruses for this episode, I want to say a big thank you to Bob Skinner, who as always kept me up to date with what was happening. Lizzie and her husband Paul were both much loved members of the extended CFZ family. Indeed, back when they got married back in 2013, I think it was, I walked Lizzie down the aisle, taking up for the day the position of father of the bride, which was one of the high spots of my life. But Lizzie and Paul have just come back from a holiday in Portugal, and I'm most envious because Portugal is one of those places I've always wanted to visit. Not only is it a great place to go for a holiday, I believe, but it is one of those places that it is Britain's longest standing ally, going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and it is a place where there is a lot of fascinating wildlife. And if this weren't all enough, it's a place where my next guest lives. Ladies and gentlemen, once again let me introduce you to our old friend Steve Andrews. I think that the subject you and I are going to talk about today is something which a lot of people don't talk about, and that's how the climate change is affecting the butterfly populations. And you're in a very interesting place, because whereas it's cold and wet here and we won't see any more butterflies until the spring, except for the occasional one that's overwintering, you're in a much warmer part of Europe. It's still Europe, but it's much warmer and has a Mediterranean climate. So the natural history of your area is completely different. So what species have you got at the moment?
Well, John, first of all, I'd just like to say that we are currently living in a very good example of climate change having serious effects on the weather and everything else, and nature. In that, like usually at this time of year, December, we normally have quite serious frosts. It's usually very cold. You won't see any butterflies at all about. Maybe you might see the odd red admiral or a white. This year, it was cold a few weeks ago. It nearly got to freezing, but it didn't get there. In some parts of Portugal, we have actually had snow in the mountainous areas, but not in the area I live in. I've been here for 8 years, and I have never seen so many butterflies at this time of year. And we have now got too much rain. Earlier in the year, in the summer, there were no butterflies about at all. I could walk about. I spent a lot of time walking about in the heat of summer, and I saw nothing, not even a white butterfly, nothing at all. And the autumn arrived and the rains came, which was fantastic. There was like people, seriously worried. The reservoirs were drying up, the crops were failing, the heat was intense. There were no butterflies about, as I was saying. The ground was all dry, the vegetation was all dead. Anyway, the rains finally arrived, and the rains have kept going. In the last week or so, we've had so much rain. But the reservoirs are apparently, some of the reservoirs are about to overflow. There was too much water in the reservoirs. Lisbon is completely and utterly been messed up with floods for the last few days and over the weekend. Stations in Lisbon have been flooded. A hospital was flooded. Main streets in Lisbon flooded. The army have been called in, to deal with the situation now. People have been evacuated. And we've got several more days of heavy rain forecast. So where all this is going to go, we don't know. But the area I live in, I've just been so delighted to see the vegetation growing again, the rain, the plants, all happening. And the butterflies have responded well to all this. So one butterfly, I've got to mention this because this was just amazing. Halloween arrived. And I saw my first red admiral for this year. Well, not for this year, because I saw them, January, February of last year. For this autumn, I saw one on Halloween in a little wood near here in the same place. If you go there, it looks like every year the same butterfly is there. Of course, it isn't the same one. And that day there was rain. And the nettles in the area I live in, the annual nettle grows, not the stinging nettle, the annual nettle. The annual nettle needs the rain. So it grows like maybe September, October, November, December, January, February. March, it starts to die down. And the Red Admiral has got all this coordinated so well that somehow or other they're able to arrive here, Halloween, 1st of November, that time period, every year, the nettles are growing and they do really well. And last year, I was helping some of them and I had 2 generations of Red Admirals. So I had the first one starting early November, the butterflies emerging maybe December, then they were like laying again, and then there were more caterpillars, and then they went through January, February, early March, and then they left. Now, where they go, I don't know. Maybe they go over to you in the UK. But the breeding period for the Red Admiral here in Portugal is, as I say, late autumn and through the winter. And this winter has been fantastic for them. Like the nettles are growing really well because we've had so much rain. The annual nettle, which is normally maybe a foot high, some of them are like 2 foot high.
Wow.
There's masses of them here. And my landlord, this is great as well. And this is where like personal involvement and telling people about all this stuff really can make a difference. I've told my landlord about, because he sees me with the butterfly and the caterpillars and all this. And I've told him, look, this Red Admiral one, it needs the nettles. So he lets me have a nettle patch in the garden, which of course this year has got caterpillars on it and it's doing fine. He also lets me have milkweed in the garden for the monarchs, and they're doing fine. and the swallowtails are on the roo, and we've got fennel here as well, and the swallowtails have been doing fine. There's also, right now in the garden, there are large white caterpillars on the broccoli. Now, my landlord wouldn't like that, but he's away, so right now they're okay. And earlier, when was it? Maybe 3 weeks ago, I had actually 12 large white butterflies, which actually emerged, they closed and flew. And I've got something like, I think it's 10 or 12 red admiral chrysalises in the kitchen right now. I got one here in this sandwich. I'm just going to show you. I got like this sandwich box here. You can see there's a chrysalis there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some of the annual nettle. And probably hard. Oop. I'm trying to get this. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, there's the caterpillar there on my hand.
Oh, it's final instar, isn't it?
And that's a red admiral caterpillar.
Yes, and he's very, very close to pupating.
That's right. Yes, it's in the last instar, and I've got as well, which I went out the garden to get earlier before I started talking to you. This is a swallowtail. You can see that. This is a swallowtail caterpillar in its last instar. And here in the town I live in, Quinta-du-Conde, the female swallowtail prefers the rue over fennel. And this is amazing, and I wrote about it in my book. This is an example of adaptation, like going on, you know. What has happened here is that usually in the summers, it's just too hot, too dry. The fennel all dies down, it's brown, there's no leaves, no flowers, nothing. The rue manages to grow in people's gardens. Here we call it arruda. And there's a superstition, the Portuguese people believe that this keeps evil away from your house. And my landlord told me, and I said, well, this is great because this is really good luck for the butterflies, not only good luck for the people, good luck for the butterflies because the swallowtail is using this plant. And so that's a little bit about the swallowtail here and an example of adaptation occur, again, due to climate change, because what's happened is because it becomes like ridiculously hot here now every year. And we get a drought every year, and wild plants like the fennel all die down. And so this butterfly is found in the human areas. The people are growing the rue, which is an alternative food plant. And so it's preferred, you know, it now prefers to use that plant. There's also a wild rue here, but that isn't growing in this area. So what I'm saying basically is that the swallowtail, European swallowtail, is able to survive well in an urban area in Portugal because people grow rue in their gardens because they believe it is good luck. And the swallowtail also, like the monarch, can have several generations in the year. What usually happens, and again, this is an example of this year being unusual, is that the last brood of swallowtails, the chrysalises become brown, and then they're ones which will then wait through, say, December, January, February, and they emerge March onward. This year, we've still got caterpillars, we're still getting green chrysalises. Green chrysalises mean they're going to hatch this year. And so the temperature, like right now, the last few days has been really mild here. And if this continues, and I'm going to be, you know, monitoring, watching all this stuff going on, this may be the first year that I've seen butterflies and the whole cycle of the egg, caterpillar, pupae, or chrysalises, and adult butterflies all being able to carry on right through the winter. Because I know, like, if any of these can get through now through January, then we're going to be plain sailing, because February is always mild here.
If
if you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another show. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has helped through the show, particularly this time Steve Andrews, Bob Skinner, Richard Freeman, and who else? And of course my producer Louis and Graham, who looks after me, and my two lovely housekeepers, Miss Shelley and Miss Judy. I think this is probably the worst continuity error in a long history of continuity errors, because last week when I filmed the last segment I was wearing this jumper. This week I've just come back from the doctor. I'm wearing my leather jacket because it makes me look cool, and I've got a small black cat sitting on my arm. But if you ignore that, I also want to say a very special thank you to Miss Judy and young Master Graham for their wonderful Pan's People dance routine during my song about walruses. And so here we are at the end. I will be back on Wednesday. What is going to be in Wednesday's show? Well, I think it's going to be something about mammoths, but I'm not 100% sure. And what's going to be in next week's show? Well, next Saturday's show, we'll have the second part of the interview with Steve Andrews, and it's the return of Ian Squibbs with another look at a classic Loch Ness Monster picture. So, until then, I hope you're waiting agog. Mr. McQuinnan, are you waiting agog? Because, assuming you're all going to be here on Wednesday and Saturday, I'll be seeing you.